going to wing it because Steve Moore's actually not in the room, so I'm going to try to stretch if necessary until he comes in here. He's doing a radio interview. Steve's a very busy man. Please continue enjoying your lunch. I'm not going to mind clattering the plates just one little bit. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute. I want to thank you all for being here today to see Stephen Moore at the Heritage Foundation and his new book, Fueling Freedom. As I said, you should be in here very shortly after his radio program. And I just want to take this opportunity that I have to tell you a little bit about the Heartland Institute. I see a lot of familiar faces in here, and I saw some people I haven't seen in a while, but I'll be glad to see, but I also see a lot of new faces. So I want to take this opportunity to give you a little bit of a background on the Heartland Institute. We are a 32-year-old free market think tank, founded by libertarian economists who got around the table regularly here in Chicago and decided that the Midwest needs its own think tank fighting for free markets, against crony capitalism, for more individual liberty, against large government, and for less government involvement in our lives and our economies. And we've been doing that now for 32 years. For 31 of those years, we were located here in the Loop in Chicago. I'm very happy to be here. But we're also very happy to have left. We feel like we're just getting out ahead of the posse sometimes, so good luck to you all. We're still here. But we're lucky enough to buy a new building in Arlington Heights, in the northwest suburbs. We moved in there in August of last year, so we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. Those of you here who have not yet come out to our new office on North Wilkie Road in Arlington Heights, I really hope to see you there soon. It is a fantastic facility. And we have events like this there every week. In our own space for these kind of events, so that's great. Pushing forward that free market message. So we hope to see you out there then. As you also, a lot of people in this room know, the Heartland Institute is happy to welcome Steve Moore here because he's been a friend of ours for a long time. But he's also, his book, Fueling Freedom, is about the energy sector and environment. And a lot of people here, I'm sure, are aware that the Heartland Institute is known more than anything else globally, but for our work on the environment. In fact, we're quite a target by the eco-left, as I call them, because we've been so effective in our mission on free market environmentalism to convince the public and politicians and policymakers that there is not a climate crisis caused by humanity, that the up and down of the climate is well within natural variation, and that the science does not prove, not even really come close, that humans are causing runaway global warming, a huge rising of the sea levels, all of those things. And we stand up on the science on that fact. And standing up for science is so controversial. We have the very well-funded members of the eco-left, the Greenpeaces, the 350.orgs, the George Soroses, the Tom Steyers, the Sierra Clubs, all coming after the Heartland Institute. And in fact, joining forces with government to try to come after the Heartland Institute and others that are in the climate realism camp who fight for free market environmentalism. You may have heard of a group called Attorneys General for United for Clean Energy. About, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, they had a press conference starring Al Gore and themselves, announcing that they're going to come after quote-unquote climate deniers, but really people who are skeptical of the hypothesis that has not been proven, that humans are causing a climate crisis. And a lot of our friends, like the Competitive Enterprise Institute, for one in Washington, D.C., has been subpoenaed by the Attorney General of the Virgin Islands. Raise your hand if you knew they had one. But apparently he's able to issue subpoenas to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, asking for all information, all correspondence with the evil ExxonMobil Corporation. Because supposedly ExxonMobil lied about global warming, lied to their shareholders, lied to the world, that humans are not causing the climate crisis. And for this, they have committed fraud, apparently. That's the legal theory. And a co-conspirator in this fraud are organizations like the Competitive Enterprise Institute and the Heartland Institute. We have not received our own, genuine own subpoena. I'm really disappointed, frankly. We're waiting, though. We are named in all in these subpoenas. The Attorney General of New York has issued a subpoena. The Attorney General of the Virgin Islands has issued a subpoena. And as we learned last week, because Exxon is countersuing, the Attorney General of Massachusetts has also issued a subpoena, and the Heartland Institute's named in all of these. And they want every little bit, and you have to read these to believe them. I'm no lawyer, but I can tell a broad, witch hunt, fishing expedition when I see one. And that's what these subpoenas are. They want every little bit of correspondence you've ever had with ExxonMobil that have mentioned the words, they have keywords in there: climate change, denier, sea levels, temperature. And search for all of these, and hire a whole staff to go forensically look for all of your emails and share these things, because we want to know, I don't know, if you've been up to no good. Our friends at the Competitive Enterprise Institute are fighting that subpoena. When we get one, we will also fight it, because this is at heart an attack on free speech. It's an attack on it's really an attack on an individual, be it a corporation, a nonprofit, or even people in this room, to disagree with state dogma on a topic of science. The day that becomes illegal in the United States is the day we're not in the United States anymore. And so the Heartland Institute has been fighting this, we've been keeping our eye on it, and we will continue to do so, and we will do so, obviously, with the support of a lot of people in this room. And we thank you very much for that support. And in fact, if you are not yet a donor to the Heartland Institute, we very much encourage you to join us in this fight for science, this fight for free markets, this fight for individual liberty. There's information and many staffers here that can help you to join the Heartland Institute and join us in this fight. With that, I see our guest has arrived, and so I will now introduce him so we can begin the program proper. Stephen Moore has had a hand in some of the most influential organizations in the United States, promoting the virtues of free markets and economic growth. He is currently the Distinguished Visiting Fellow for the Project for Economic Growth at the Heritage Foundation. Now, immediately before taking his current position at Heritage in 2014, he wrote on the economy and public policy for the Wall Street Journal, and is also a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. Moore, of course, returned, as I mentioned, to Heritage in 2014. He had been serving with that organization since the Reagan administration, serving as the think tank's Grover and Herman Fellow in Budgetary Affairs from 1984 to 1987. Moore today focuses on advancing public policies that increase the rate of economic growth to help the United States retain its position as the global economic superpower. He also works on budget, fiscal, and monetary policy and showcases states that get their fiscal houses in order. You might imagine that's a pretty short list, and Illinois is not among them. Moore's early career was shaped by three people who had a profound influence on him. Julian Simon, the late Cato Institute scholar. Round of applause by Jim Johnson for him, and for everyone. Ed Fulner, the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, and of course Art Laffer, the economist best known for the Laffer curve and having such an influence on the excellent economic policies of Ronald Reagan. Moore calls his creation of the Club for Growth in 1999 the defining moment of his career. The organization, which he left in 2004, helps elect conservative members of Congress, including current Heritage President Jim DeMint when he ran for Senate for the first time. And Moore also founded the Free Enterprise Fund that then went on to the Wall Street Journal and then back to Heritage. So follow me, there'll be a quiz later. Moore, of course, is a local. He grew up in Utica Township, Illinois, received a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and he holds a Master of Arts in Economics from the great George Mason University. He's the author of several books, including Who's the Fairest of Them All? The Truth About Opportunity, Taxes, and Wealth in America. Encounter Broadside, Moore versus Krugman, which I recommend you read. It's the Frilla in Manila envelopes. And with co-author Kathleen Hartnett White, he's written the book that he's here to talk about today, a very important one, called Fueling Freedom, Exposing the Mad War on Energy. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Steve Moore.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for being here. It is so fun to see so many personal friends. I have some high school classmates from here. I went to New High School, graduated in 1978. I still consider Chicago home, even though I haven't lived here for 30 years. So thank you, Jim, so much for hosting this, and for the Heartland Institute. And what an amazing organization you have. I don't think there's any organization in America that has done better work exposing the fraud of global warming that the Heartland Institute. So thank you for doing that. Because I don't want this on the record, but I think global warming is the greatest scam of the last 100 years. And I think it was a real threat to our, it may be the most important threat to our liberty and freedom and economic growth that is out there. So thank you for the amazing work that you guys do and on budget and tax policies and others. I had a great weekend here in Chicago, and I was playing golf here yesterday, and I was on the golf course. I was coming out of the clubhouse, and this woman, she ran up to me. It was so cute. She ran up to me, she saw me, she said, "I know you, don't I?" Yes, sir. She said, I'm sure I've seen you on TV before. And, it was really so cute. And I said, she was just so full of joy. And I said, "Well, I don't know, man, what do you watch?" And that kind of confused her. And it was so funny. She kind of the light bulb went on. She said, "Wait a minute." She said, "Didn't I just see you on Wheel of Fortune?" How many of you watch Fox News, by the way? How many, anybody watch MSNBC? Let me tell you a little bit about the book, and then I'd love to just take questions from you all about what's going on with the economy or politics, whatever you want to talk about. You mentioned, by the way, Jim, Julian Simon and Art Laffer, and I consider myself a really pretty lucky guy because I think those are two of the great economists of the last 50 years. By the way, I was also friends with Milton Friedman, so I've been 3 times lucky in that regard. But Julian, for those of you who don't know, the thing that was so similar about Julian Simon and Art Laffer is they were saying things about how the world works that was contrary to what everybody else was saying. So when I met Julian Simon at the University of Illinois in 1979, remember that? We're running out of oil, we're running out of gas, the world is overpopulated, we're running out of farmland. 25 years from now, everything's going to be worse, not better. And Julian was like one of the only people in the country, if not the world, to say all of this stuff that Paul Ehrlich and all these doomsday people are talking about is completely wrong. Life on Earth is getting better, that the price of oil and gas and coal and farmland and food is going to go down, not up. And Julian was proven to be 100% correct, right? And the doomsdayers were wrong. Similarly, when Arthur Laffer started teaching us about the importance of taxes and that you can actually cut tax rates and put more growth and more revenues than incentives matter, both Julian and Arthur were seen as lunatics. They were so personally assailed as take away their academic credentials, and of course everything that Arthur Laffer said about the Reagan tax cuts and so on, he was one of the architects of that, was proven true as well. So it's amazing that I've been able to be mentored by both of those incredible economists, who both of them deserve the Nobel Prize in Economics if that was truly based on changing the world. So, okay, here's what the book is about. In one sentence, if we get this right, if we use our energy resources the way that we should, and we are the most richly endowed country in the world with energy, that within 5 or 6 years, not only can the United States of America be energy independent, which we certainly can be, and that would be the first time in 50 years, but, and by the way, I used to say that, Jim, all the time, and people would be stunned by it. I don't think anybody in this room is even stunned by that, right? You probably know that's true, because it's almost become a conventional wisdom that because of the shale oil and gas revolution, we can very easily become energy independent. But I've now taken that a step further, and I would make the case that not only can we be energy independent, but we now have the capacity to become the energy dominant country in the world. So we can be essentially the Saudi Arabia of the next century if we get this right. And I would submit to you that has enormous implications, not just for our economy and the economic advantages. I don't have to tell you this. I mean, you all understand this very well, that if we are producing more and more energy than we ever have before, that's going to mean millions of new jobs. It's going to mean reducing our budget deficit because it's going to involve hundreds of billions of dollars of additional tax revenues. We're going to reduce our trade deficit. By the way, the jobs that we are going to create in the energy industry are the kind of high-paying middle-class jobs that Americans want back. So we're talking about jobs like construction workers and truck drivers and petroleum engineers and welders and pipe fitters, and these are jobs that pay $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year. And those are exactly the kind of jobs Americans do want to see return to this country. And just as an aside, I think it's very interesting right now that if Republicans have an incredible opportunity, in my opinion, on this issue of energy. And basically, we're going to go full in for using all of our resources. And the reason for that is the Democrats have a lot of, they have an internal struggle within their party right now. And when you think about it, and this is a struggle that Republicans haven't done a good enough job exploiting. Think about who the two most gigantic and the big funders of the Democratic Party today. I would say that the two largest are obviously number one, the unions, right? The unions are major donors to Democratic candidates. You know that in Illinois more than just about any other state. The teachers' unions run the state, obviously. But the other big faction of the Democratic Party is what I would describe as a fairly lunatic green movement in America that is getting stronger all of the time, unfortunately. And I say lunatic because I think a lot of the things that these hard left green groups believe in are extremely dangerous. So the green groups, what they're saying right now is what we ought to do, their new strategy is keep it in the ground. Don't use any of our energy. Stop drilling for oil. Stop mining for coal. Stop going after natural gas resources. Just keep that in the ground. Now, when you think about it, who would be hurt the most by that? Well, it would be unions, right? The people who do this job are union workers. So all those people that I just described, the truckers and the welders and the pipers and all of those groups would be severely damaged. And the trick, I think, for Republicans is to drive that wedge. And actually, Trump is doing a pretty good job of this if he could get that on message and stop, insulting people. But if he would simply just talk about this issue and simply say, look, he should go to industrial union halls and say, we're the ones who are trying to save your jobs, as the people like Tom Steyer who are trying to destroy your jobs. And in fact, that happens to be true. So my point is, how do you have Tom Steyer, who's the billionaire who funds all of these candidates, and the industrial unions, how can they be part of the same party when their interests are completely divergent? So we can be energy dominant in the world. And I would make a couple of points about this. First of all, one of the statistics that we use that I think no one else has used before is we worked with some of the great kind of petroleum geologists and engineers, and we came up with some estimates about what is the worth, the asset value of all the energy that we have in the United States today. I'm talking about the oil, gas, and coal. And they tell us that based on all the latest geological surveys, that the United States, underneath public lands, has somewhere near 50 trillion, that's trillion with a T, $50 trillion worth of oil and gas and coal, and that we can get at with current technologies. That is to say, and by the way, the technologies get better all the time, right? So 10 years from now, it'll be more than $50 trillion. Now, let's say that we actually go after that and start using it. Just in the next 10 years, we estimate the federal government, because it's on public lands, that the federal government could actually raise money by leasing these federal lands. And I'm not talking about Yosemite and Yellowstone. I'm talking about, just basic lands the government probably shouldn't own in the first place. The federal government over the next 20 years could raise about $4 trillion in revenues. Well, you all know we have a $19 trillion deficit. Is there an easier way to reduce our deficit and our debt than actually creating jobs? The oil and gas companies will pay the United States government money to go after these resources. So $50 trillion in assets, $4 trillion in revenues to the United States government over the next 20 years. Now, so what is the argument against this? Why in the world couldn't we use these resources? Why wouldn't we do everything possible? Before I answer that question, I want to make one other point. I got involved in this issue of energy about 7 or 8 years ago when I met a guy by the name of Harold Hamm. How many of you know who Harold Hamm is? Some of you do. Harold Hamm is one of the guys who has changed the country in an incredible way. So Harold Hamm is the one who owns a lot of the energy resources in North Dakota. And North Dakota is sort of the epicenter of where the shale oil and gas revolution began. And Harold Hamm, I mean, what an amazing story this is. Harold Hamm, I met him about 8 years ago. I was working at the Journal. I did one of our weekend interviews with him, and his PR person kept pestering me to meet him, and I had no interest, but I started reading a little bit about him. I thought, well, maybe I should get to know this guy. Amazing story. I mean, this is one of the great Horatio Alger stories of all time. Harold Hamm grew up in rural Oklahoma, literally with no electricity in his home in the 1950s. He was the 13th of 14 kids. At the age of something like 12, you know, his family didn't even have enough money to feed him, so he left home and he just struck it on his own. And he's one of these guys who just, you know, he's just had this entrepreneurial instinct. So, you know, he started with a little truck, you know, water truck for the people who were drilling and providing water, and then he had 2 trucks and 5, and then he started getting involved in drilling, and then he somehow got a geology degree, and then he started drilling and built up this company, and he was the first one who discovered that you could get a lot of the shale oil and gas out of North Dakota. And so he has become now, he is by some estimates the 8th richest person in the world. Only in America, right? If you have somebody who grows up with no electricity in their home, dirt poor, and becomes incredibly rich. Well, that's how I got interested in this whole issue, was going out to North Dakota and seeing what was happening there. Now, this was 8 years ago when the price of oil was still very high, but it was an amazing thing. How many of you have ever been to North Dakota, by the way? Raise your hand. I've been to every continental state multiple times. I travel all the time, but I had never been to North Dakota. And so, you know, about 6 years ago in February, Harold asked me to go out there. By the way, the lesson I learned, you do not want to go to North Dakota in February. But it was amazing to see what was happening there. It was like, to see what was happening in North Dakota, it was like what it must have been like during the gold rush era in California. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I had spent $359 to stay at a Best Western hotel in this little town of Williston, because literally there was nowhere to stay. You know, it's just the economic activity there was incredible. We had an article in the Wall Street Journal, so it must be true, right? That they blew me out 6 years ago that the strippers were leaving Las Vegas and they were going to North Dakota. An amazing amount of economic development happened there. And one of the interesting things, I know I'm kind of jumping around, but I always love to talk about how, you know, life and politics are so rich with irony. And the ultimate irony of Barack Obama's presidency will be that in his 8 years as president, he will have presided over the biggest oil and gas boom in American history. Now, this is an industry that he despises, right? He despises the oil and gas industry, and yet, despite Barack Obama, all this stuff happened, which is why everything, you know, remember in his speech back in January, he said, "Isn't it wonderful we have $2 a gallon gasoline?" Now, here's the guy, everything he's trying to do is to raise the price of gasoline and shut down oil development, and not be taken credit for it. But I would even make the case, by the way, that without the shale oil and gas revolution, Barack Obama never would have been reelected president. Because if you look at the statistics on jobs, from 2008 through 2013, on net, every single new job that was created in the United States on net was in the oil and gas industry. So we wouldn't have had a recovery had it not been for this incredible new development that happened. So that is an amazing story, and I would simply say this: what made it possible were these 2 technologies, which most of you know about, but both also, by the way, made in America and not developed by the major oil companies like Exxon and Chevron and Mobil, but these were developed by these wildcatters, the people like, you know, Harold Hamm, who just kind of figured this out. That it's not as if all of a sudden God endowed America with all this oil and gas, right? What happened was that oil and gas has been there for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. What happened was, because of these technologies, fracking and horizontal drilling, we finally cracked the code to figuring out how to get at this stuff. And we're way ahead technologically than the rest of the world in terms of fracking and horizontal drilling. And you know, it's amazing because now these drills, I mean, just to give you a sense of how technologically advanced this is. And by the way, Jim, this is right out of Julian Simon, right? Because Julian Simon taught us where do natural resources come from. They don't come from the ground, they come from the human mind. And this is a perfect example of that. That because of these technologies, overnight, we doubled the amount of energy we had. And as the technologies get better, we'll have more and more. And it's funny because Barack Obama, as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, was running around the country saying the reason we have to move towards green energy is because we're running out of oil and gas. You know, he said, pretty soon we're going to drill the last barrel of oil. Mr. President, with all due respect, America is not running out of oil and gas, we're running into it. Big, big, big time. And so it's a very good news story, but I wanted to then pivot back to the final point, and then I'll take some questions from you and whatever you want to talk about. So then, of course, there is the issue of global warming and how are we going to keep the planet from heating up and blowing up if we don't do something about stopping fossil fuel development. And I would just have a few responses to that. First of all, I don't think global warming is a great crisis, but let's just first, I know this is a Heartland Institute audience, but let's for a moment suspend our disbelief and let's say global warming is here to stay and that this is a great crisis. I would say a couple things about this. First of all, even if that were true, stuff. Especially in a lot of the Washington, D.C. area. And what's happened in Virginia, it may be happening in Illinois, I can't say, but in Virginia it is heartbreaking to see what's happening. These towns, because of EPA regulations, which were put into effect to intentionally destroy the coal industry, because there is a war on coal, these towns have been completely wiped out. Completely. These towns have, 5 or 10 or 15,000 people. They've been completely eviscerated because of these regulations. The coal mines have shut down, and now you go to these towns. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening in these towns. Where once you had vibrant communities where people were actually producing coal and had middle-class lifestyles, they have been replaced with towns that are now unemployment lines and people on meth. And it's just a disgrace. And then Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama talk about how much they care about working-class people. Right? They don't care about working class people. You saw what happened when Hillary Clinton went to West Virginia, right? I mean, and she tried to say, oh, well, maybe we're not going to destroy every coal job. She will if she's president. But then, even more insulting, to give you a sense of how Stalinistic these liberals have become, she said, no, well, that's okay. Maybe we're not going to have coal mining jobs, but we're going to, we're going to reassign you, and now you're going to make solar panels. I mean, how insulting is that to these people? Really, in the Appalachian Mountains, they're going to make solar panels? I mean, it's just crazy. So that's part of what's going on. And so they say, well, let's shut down our coal. That's going to stop global warming. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. And the reason it's ridiculous is because as we speak right now, as I'm standing here, right now, China and India alone, just two countries, China and India, that have combined 2 billion people, China and India over the next 2 years are going to build at least 500 new coal plants. So for every time we shut down a coal plant, they build 10. How in the world does that shut down global warming? And I would make the case to it actually makes it worse. As we shut down our energy development in the United States, it makes the planet worse, and here is why. Because we do have clean coal in the United States. We do. Clean coal is not a myth. It's here to stay. If you look at the emissions from coal plants today versus 50 years ago, there's just no comparison. If you look at and I know this is true because I've gotten these statistics from the Heartland Institute, right? But if you look at the emissions from energy plants and utilities today versus 50 years ago, and you talk about real pollutants, like carbon monoxide and lead and sulfur and things that actually make people sick and actually are real pollutants in the air. Those pollutants from coal plants have been reduced 50, 60, 70, 80, in some cases 90%. So the amount of clean coal is here. I guarantee you in China and India and Indonesia and these other countries, they haven't reduced their emissions. So all we're doing is displacing our coal plants for coal plants that are being built in other countries that are much dirtier and they actually emit more carbon into the atmosphere. So it's a setback for reducing carbon emissions and greenhouse gases when we shut down our energy. The other point to make about this is, look, is there anybody who really believes, let me put it like this, when Barack Obama says, well, we've got this Paris Accord, right? You know, everybody's going to reduce their carbon emissions. I mean, Trump is right about, there's some things Trump is right about, some things wrong. He's exactly right about this. The rest of the country, world really is laughing at us at this. And I've noticed this so many times in dealing in policy with Obama. Obama has this really weird, he has this weird tendency to just believe what he wants to believe. So he wants to believe that they're going to comply with these carbon emission standards, so it's going to happen. But meanwhile, when they say they're going to do it, we observe what's really happening in the world, which is they are laughing behind our back. Final one. So one of the problems we face as free market conservatives is that the kids have been indoctrinated with the anti-carbon, global warming, greenhouse gas stuff since they've been in the kindergarten, right? And it's just, it's an epidemic in the schools. So that it's not surprising by the time they're in high school and college, you know, they believe this stuff fervently. In fact, I learned on college campus, you can't even talk about global warming anymore. You just can't, because it's assaulting their religion to bring up global warming. You just don't get anywhere with these kids. But what is so interesting about it is to talk, especially with high school and college kids, the new thing is it's so cool to be green, right? It's cool. We got to do this because it's going to be wonderful. We're going to use windmills and we're going to run solar power, and you know, that's going to be so great for the planet. It's going to be great for the country. We're going to create all these green jobs and so on. And I love to do this with the kids. I always say, okay, you kids think it's so wonderful to go with windmills and solar power and so on. I say, how many of you know where you get your electricity from? Where do you get your electric power from? And I get the same reaction, whether I'm at Yale or some, you know, inner city high school. The kids always say the same thing. Well, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. Of course we know where we get our electricity from. It comes right out of that socket, right there. That's where the electricity comes. Kids, and by the way, most Americans don't even have any idea where they get their electricity from. I mean, it just comes out of the socket. You probably know this because you're a well-educated group of people. But what's the #1 source of electric power today in the United States? Coal. Well, actually, coal and natural gas are almost exactly equal. It used to be coal, but I think actually natural gas might have slightly moved ahead of coal. But they're both somewhere around 35 to 40%. So that means we're getting about 75% of our electric power today from coal and natural gas. Anybody know what's #3? Nuclear. Nuclear is about, what is it, about 10 or 15%, I think, of our electricity comes from nuclear. Anybody know what #4 is? Hydropower. Hydropower. By the way, hydropower is actually a renewable source of electric production that actually works. Hydropower is actually a really good way to get electricity. So when you combine all 4 of those with a few others, you're talking about well over 90% of electricity comes from coal, natural gas, hydropower, and nuclear. Guess what? The left hates coal. They hate natural gas. They hate hydropower. I mean, why do they hate hydropower? Dams. They don't want dams built, right? So that you can't have hydropower because it kills fish. And they hate nuclear power. By the way, nuclear power, how did they against nuclear power? Nuclear power, if you actually believe that global warming is the greatest crisis that ever confronted the planet, there's no question what we would have. If we all of a sudden, all of us, we had 100% proof that within 20 years, you know, we're going to be underwater and all the things that are wrong. If that were actually true, there's absolutely no question what we would have to do to preserve our living standard. We have to build 100 nuclear power plants, right? Because nuclear power plants are just a good way to get electricity. And guess what? They don't generate any carbon whatsoever in the environment. But they're against all of those. And that's, I think, the point I'm making to you is I think there is something else going on here in terms of the war against energy. And that is that this has become so fanatical that it's not even about global warming, I don't think. I think it is a kind of religious idea that America is a bad place, industrialization is a bad thing, and it's almost like the penance we have to pay for what we've done as a country, that we're going to have to, you know, go to pre-industrial age energy. And I think that's what we're up against, and it's a fight that we have got to win, and I think we will win. And when we do win, we're going to see an incredible economic future. I estimate that both just developing the energy resources we have in the next 10 years, just that alone will raise our GDP growth rate by 1 percentage point. So in other words, right now we're growing at less than 2% under Obama, you all know that. What I'm saying is just the energy portion goes from 2 to 3. And then you do tax reform and other things, you can go from 3 to 4. We can grow at 4%. And ladies and gentlemen, the difference between 2% growth and 4% is huge, huge, huge. It solves every problem we got. So thank you very much for having me. It's so nice of you guys to come. I know you have important lives and business meetings and stuff. If you have to leave, that's fine. But I'm willing to take 10 or 15 minutes of questions. And do you want to
just put your hand up, and we'll get the microphone over to you, and off you go.
Mr. Moore, first, thank you for your very exciting presentation. But two, could we make a business? Perhaps could we make a business? Perhaps a new industry on selling our clean coal technology in places like China and India and other places that burn it the way they do now, which is not to say the way we're doing it. You just made a point that most of our burning
Can you repeat that?
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard.
Can you sell the clean coal technology?
What I'm asking,
Oh, yeah, can we do it? So, it's a great question. A couple of things about that. First of all, my niece is just got back from the Peace Corps. This is a roundabout way of answering the question, but my niece was in the Peace Corps, and she was in Africa. She was in some remote village in Tanzania. And I went out and visited her a couple of years ago when she was there. And how many of you have ever been to Africa? Raise your hand. A lot of you have. And you go to these remote villages. It is really an amazing thing to see. These people, the greatest people I've ever met in my life, by the way. I love the African people that I met. But they're truly living like it's the 16th century. They don't have, and the two things that they don't have that they need that would massively increase their living standards are what? They need electric power and they need clean water, right? Those, just give them electric, and we don't have to give it to them, just have to give them access to electric power and clean water, and you're going to reduce their death rate, you're going to, huge advances, and you probably increase their life expectancy by 10 years just by doing those two things. So my point about telling you that is, there's a morality issue here, I think, that our side should, we too often we give them the moral high ground. We have the moral high ground on this issue. Imagine going to these countries and saying, you shouldn't use natural gas, and you shouldn't use oil and coal, you should use windmills. Guess what? The best chapter of our book was not written by me, but my co-author, Kathleen, Hartnett, who tells the story of the Industrial Revolution. And I'm an economic historian, and I didn't really fully appreciate this. The real story of the Industrial Revolution, we all know this, that the Industrial Revolution was the massive leap forward in living standards in the Western world, right? Once we started using modern manufacturing and machinery and steam engines, things like that, living standards soared. So we all know that, right, from our history books. What's not well known is the real history of the Industrial Revolution is a history of fossil fuels. So what happened is, in the mid to late 18th century, mankind stopped using, what did they use before, coal and gas and things like that? They used windmills, right? That's how they got their electricity. Guess what? Electricity is not a very good way to get electric power. It's extremely expensive and inefficient and unreliable. And what happened was mankind moved away from using green energy and they started using fossil fuels. And that's what helped power this incredible revolution in living standards. My point is, these poor countries still haven't even really gone through the Industrial Revolution. That's the most important thing. Give them access to power. It'll improve their health care, it'll improve all of these other things. And it is truly immoral for these green groups to go to these countries and say, no, you shouldn't have electric power. Now, your point, as China gets richer, and as India gets richer and Mexico gets richer, they're going to clean up their environment the way we have. How many of you have been to Beijing? Raise your hand. The air quality in Beijing, when I was there, was awful, right? You can hardly breathe there in Beijing. 25, 30 years from now, I think they're going to go through the same, clean air standards that we did. But first you have to develop. And my point is that as you get richer as a nation, then you spend more money on environmental improvement. And that will happen here, just as it happened here, it will happen all over the world. Yeah, they're going to have clean coal, they're going to reduce their emissions of other things. But the one thing they are way behind on us, though, is fracking technology and horizontal drilling. They still haven't figured that one out. What else?
A question in the back?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
So from the very poor countries, let's go to the very wealthy countries. And as the United States, under your view, exploits these natural resources and obviously offers them on the market for sale, what will the impact be to our friends in the Gulf? And what do you see as the sort of mid and longer term effects of greater U.S. dominance in the global energy marketplace?
That's a great question. I kind of neglected to bring this up. But I think the question is actually, it's kind of obvious what the answer is, which is that, why have we been so integrally involved in the Middle East in the last 50 years? It's because they have oil. I mean, it's because they have oil. So, I think that the United States presence in the Middle East can be vastly reduced if we're producing our own oil and gas and not relying on Saudi Arabia and these other countries. A lot of these other countries simply won't be the geo-strategic place on the planet that they are on. And that would be, to me, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It'll shift the balance of power away from the Middle East to North America. By the way, I like to lump the U.S. and Canada together in this because we're like one super region. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, and fighting terrorism. I mean, why in the world would we send our dollars to Iran and to Saudi Arabia and to Venezuela and to Russia and all these other countries when we can produce this here? And we know, I mean, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day that they were estimating that ISIS gets about $5 to $10 million of funding a week from petrodollars. So let's put ISIS out of business. Let's just stop sending money to the terrorists.
The big thing now is one world government.
Is what?
One world government. Oh, is it on? Okay. The big thing now is one world government, and Agenda 21 is a lot about sustainability, and sustainability is all about global warming. And the reason why they don't want fuel in Africa is because it would increase the emissions, the carbon emissions. And this is a whole role of the UN to reduce the carbon emissions. So it's not only the United States, it's what the UN is kind of fostering upon the countries of the world to get rid of fracking, get rid of coal, get rid of all this stuff. And we have to go to windmills because global warming is the thing. And this is so believed.
So let me just give you guys some interesting statistics. Anybody want to take a guess today at what percentage of our power, all of our energy, what percentage of our energy today in America comes from wind and solar power?
2 to 3%.
I heard somebody over here say, I heard somebody did 2%.
1%.
Sir, you're way behind the times, we're up to 2.8%. So, this is like this. People are living this la la land, this fantasy land. I mean, you read like the Sierra Club, and they go, we're going to go from 3 to 4. Let's say we're even maybe in a few years we might be up to 4%. By the way, this is after the United States government, just the last 10 years, under Bush, it was horrible on energy policy, and Obama was even worse. They've spent $150 billion subsidizing this stuff. When you see somebody, I don't know if you have these in Illinois because it's not the sunniest place, but are there any solar installations going on up here in Illinois? Because, a lot of places, in Virginia, everybody's putting solar paneling on their house. Well, if you see somebody putting a solar panel on their house, guess what? You paid for it, you paid for it, you paid for it. The government's basically making it free, then they're subsidizing the electricity they get. It's the biggest scam that ever happened. So even after spending $150 billion in taxpayer subsidies over the last 10 years, it still only accounts for 2 or 3 or 4% of our electricity. So that other 96% comes from these sources that we were just talking about. The other kind of interesting thing about this is, can anybody in this room tell me, of all the industrialized countries in the world, like all the OECD countries, the 30 or so, which of those countries over the last 10 years has reduced its carbon emissions the most?
United States.
The United States of America. How many of you do that? A lot of you did, a lot of you probably. Most people would be flabbergasted by that, right, Jim? How in the, wait a minute, the United States, we've reduced our carbon, how can that possibly be true? We didn't sign the Kyoto Treaty. We didn't do a cap and trade system. We didn't have the carbon tax, all these things that Obama wanted to do. We've rejected all of that. And, we reduced our carbon emissions more than the sanctimonious Europeans who did sign all of these treaties saying they're going to reduce their carbon emissions and so on. And what does anybody know why that is? Why is it we're reducing our carbon emissions? I know you know that. Why? Why is that? Why are we reducing our carbon emissions so much? What are we using?
Gas.
Gas, natural gas. Natural gas is a wonder fuel. It turns out the future is natural gas, right? Natural gas is a fuel that is abundant, it's made in America, it's cheap, and it's clean burning, right? It emits almost no carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So you would think that global warming people, this is another reason sometimes I suspect their motives. If they really believe that we have to do something to reduce carbon emissions, stop greenhouse gases, they'd be doing flips over over natural gas. And Jim, yet they hate natural gas too. So they're against anything that works. They're against anything that doesn't work. They're anything else?
Yes,
Yeah. Jerry, good to see you.
Good to see you. We enjoyed listening to you along with Larry Kudlow and many other comments.
You guys, what station is that on here?
Well, that's what I'm asking. I want to know how you get you here. We got you very well in Arizona on Saturday afternoon. We'd like to hear you.
Is that WLS or what station is the Kudlow show on here?
We don't have numbers on the dial. What number? What are you?
Larry and I have been doing that radio show together for 20 years. I mean, it's his show, and every Saturday afternoon I do it. It's the highlight of my weekend. I'll tell them you said that, by the way.
Okay, are you going to tell everybody how to get you on the radio on Saturday?
Pardon me?
Are you going to tell us what your hours are to get the radio show? What are you on? What are we going to do?
He doesn't.
Does anybody know?
Oh,
890.
What time?
890.
What time?
Come on, I don't even know when Kudlow show come out because they tape that show and every station does it at a different time. But, I have so much fun in Chicago. Sure, because I do WLS with John, somebody, who's the guy in the morning?
John Howell.
Yeah. And then I do Dan and Amy on Wednesday morning. So you've got some great conservative talk radio here.
So many we can't keep them straight.
I know, it's great. Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much. One of the things that I ran for school board and tried to tell them that we needed to inject into the curriculum. Sorry, your third point was about the kids being indoctrinated. And when I tried to mention the IPCC report and how they were not up to snuff, and I didn't have the IPCC at the time for Heartland, I was just going on William Hammer. Well, how would you encourage us or direct us to fight that battle within our
So look, you know a lot more than I do about that. So I'm going to answer your question around about that. I think there is going to, obviously we're in the midst of one of the most important elections, I think, since 1980. This is just a gigantic election we have to win, in my opinion. And I think, what does every poll for the last 3 years tell us? What is the single most important issue America care about? Sometimes it's terrorism when we have, something like what happened in Orlando. But when there isn't a terrorism attack, the number one issue is jobs, and the number two issue is the economy. Jobs 1, 2 is the economy, and it's been that way for 3 or 4 straight years. Every single month, no matter what poll you talk about. What's really interesting about this is if you look at these, when they ask Americans in these polls, what do you think the single most important issue is in the United States today? Again, it's jobs, economy, terrorism, 1, 2, 3, and then maybe education is number 4. And then what they do is they have a list of like the 30 things that people mention, because these are open-ended polls. And I love to look at that poll, because guess what's always 29th or 30th on that list? Global warming. People don't care. Now look, if you talk to somebody on the street, if we just went out there and, just the guy who's bad, do you think global warming is a problem? Oh, of course, of course people are going to say it. Yes, global warming is a great problem. If you ask a person, would you be willing to pay a nickel a gallon gasoline more for just a combat global warming? They say, hell no. They don't, nobody wants to pay for this stuff, right? They want jobs and they want, a strong economy. And so Republicans have to make the case that this energy issue is about, let them talk about global warming. We're going to talk about putting Americans back to work. Millions of more Americans. That's how we're doing it. I got maybe
Okay, two more questions real quick. There's one right here.
Hi, sorry.
Jeannie, I've met you before a couple times. I'm
And you're
a
a neutral. Are you a neutral rep?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I've met so many neutral reps.
Anyway, I wanted to talk to you because I think the biggest problem, you've touched on it today, is the fact that people that are educating our kids at the colleges, they're absolutely not educating correctly. So your alma mater, and actually 4 years ago, John Katz wrote an article saying, hey, where's our Scott Walker? And so I think the better question is, well, where's our Julian Simon, where's our Stephen Moore at the University of Illinois? Where are you? Because your institute, the Institute of Government and Public Affairs, which is really aptly named, because it really is about government and public affairs, and it's not about really the taxpayers and right policy. When I resource tax coal when we are a coal producing state. So, I mean, I think it's great that you're here, but you're talking to kind of people that believe this. But I mean, honestly, you guys should get a hold of your alma mater and you should tell them to correct their stances on this stuff. Because they are doing great harm, because you can educate us all day long, and like the surveys say, most Americans don't care about this. But guess who does care about it? All the state legislators, on the left and the right, buying into this crap because they're not educated. So, I mean, I want to thank Heartland because you guys have come down twice to Springfield. But I mean, how do you guys get your message to the people that can carry that message further?
So just a couple quick things. One is, if you want, any day you want to set it up, I will come to the Illinois State Legislature and I'll talk about this. You set it up and I'll come to Springfield. It's a horrible place that is. And I will be happy to educate folks on this. I mean, the stuff I've been talking about this afternoon is not complicated, right? You don't have to be, in fact, the average guy on the street gets this. The people who don't get this are the intellectuals. And by the way, there is a degree of incredible arrogance on the left on this issue. For this economist to say, just put the coal miners under, just tax them. Why don't we just get rid of the economists, right? Seriously, get rid of university professors. That would solve the world's problems, right? Get rid of university professors. I think universities are a disgrace today. I think we do. I know a lot of you are donors. Thank you for. Stop writing checks to universities and write checks to the Heartland. People who are destroying the capitalist system. And thank you for fighting. But the other thing is, like, I was kind of laughing when you said this about, can you imagine the people a legislator in Nebraska saying, I've got a great idea, let's tax corn, How stupid would that be, And yet they say, let's tax what we produce here in Illinois. Who does that? Or, Texas saying, let's tax oil. It would just be a stupid thing to do. And again, it's arrogant. It's just like when Hillary said, when she said about coal miners, I've been in politics for a long time. That was one of the most elitist, things I've ever heard a politician say. Then she runs around the country saying she cares so much about working class people when she's not getting paid $250,000 to give a speech. One last one, is there anything else?
I think that'll...
Yes.
Okay, last thing.
Well, aside from all these legislators, what about these college students that get a vote, they've never had a job, they are taught by these liberal academics in the universities, and they're all voting for Hillary. What do we do about the student body, children?
I think that, there's an old saying that, if you're not Marxist, before the age of 30, you have no heart, and if you're still a Marxist after 30, you have no brain, right? And so my only hope is, I mean, I saw this poll the other day, that it's heartbreaking, really. I mean, that 54% of college graduates under the age of 30 believe that socialism is a better economic model than capitalism. That's just idiotic, right? I mean, the whole lesson of the last century is that capitalism, I mean, communism, socialism, Marxism, all these isms are the same, right? They're centralizing power into the hands of a few people. It doesn't work anywhere. I mean, I say, if you want to see, here's my proposal for all these young college students. Let's send them one-way tickets to Caracas, Venezuela, right? See how much they like socialism. We're, you know, that's a country that can't even feed itself anymore longer. Or send them to Puerto Rico, or send them to Greece, or, I mean, how many times, or send them to Detroit. I mean, you want to see socialism in action, go to Detroit. I don't know, I mean, that's where the Heartland is. I know you've got a big project on education reform. But it is so disturbing